What would a second term with Trump and his VP pick J-D Vance look like economically? We have Analysts coming up today on Business Matters. And good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Don Ma. Well, it looks to be a rocky day down on Wall Street today as the major indexes move from red to green and then back into the red to all close down for the day. The Dow here down about 1 3/10%, S&P down 0.8%, and the Nasdaq continues its slump down 0.7% today. And America's biggest home builder, D.R. Horton, saw its stock jump an impressive 10% today after announcing a $4 billion stock buyback, though it did miss its new home orders target. We have more analysis on the U.S. housing market on tomorrow's broadcast. But also, it looks like gold continues to shine here, and anticipated rate cut by the Federal Reserve is perhaps keeping prices near record levels. U.S. gold futures climbed today, and the spot gold price edged higher to about $2,400 here, and this comes all after hitting an all-time high just yesterday. Analysts are anticipating long-term gains for the precious metal. Now, geopolitical instability and central bank demand are adding to the positive outlook. And first-time applications for unemployment benefits have bounced back up to a 2024 high. So the federal government reports initial jobless claims last week matched their highest level of the year with an estimated 243,000. So that's about 20,000 more than the week before. Initial claims are considered, if you will, a proxy for layoffs. So today's data also showing that the number of continuing claims, that is, or applications from people who have filed for unemployment for at least 1 week, it was nearly 1.9 million, and that's an increase of 20,000 from the prior week and the highest tally since 2021. Also today, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg in Long Beach, California, he's announcing a new facility at the largest shipping port in America, and this comes just after yesterday he announced a $5 billion project to rebuild 13 bridges across the country. So this new Long Beach facility will be completed by 2032, and it's going to cost about $1.5 billion. Here's he is today.
What a good day for Long Beach and for the American economy. This work builds a rail network on the port that more than triples the volume of cargo that can move by rail to nearly 5 million containers a year. The kind of throughput that'll keep America's economy humming and keep costs down with benefits in every part of this country as far away from here.
And here's something that you may need to know here. From the moment a metal deposit is discovered, it takes the U.S. nearly 3 decades to get production up and running. And this is according to a report by consultancy S&P Global. The group found that the U.S. has the second longest timeline in the world to build up a new mine. Right now, China has the near total dominance of the critical metal sectors. So for Washington to offset its reliance, critics have called on U.S. officials to streamline the process to obtain mining permits. And these metals are needed to achieve energy transition goals. The report also discovered that mining projects in the U.S. face a high rate of legal action. It noted that 2 projects in Arizona and Alaska, for example, right now are facing indigenous and environmental opposition. Today, we're unpacking the economic policies of former President Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J-D Vance. Vance is a successful businessman and venture capitalist, but he's also a pro-American worker and pro-union. Trump, if you remember, implemented a somewhat unconventional Republican economic plan, if you will, when he was in office, raising tariffs on foreign goods and creating incentives for American businesses to bring home operations. Critics now called it protectionist and anti-globalist. Trump, though, calls it America First. And J.D. Vance has said of a second Trump term that you're going to see a much more aggressive approach to protecting domestic manufacturers. Here he is at last night's Republican National Convention.
We're done sacrificing supply chains to unlimited global trade, and we're going to stamp more and more products with that beautiful label, Made in the USA.
Now, we're going to bring in Zach Model, chairman of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Zach, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Don. It's nice to be with you.
All right, let's start off with this. What does J.D. Vance mean here by a much more aggressive approach to protecting domestic manufacturers? What are we going to see?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see some really smart policies. I think as a country, America lost focus on producing things and we became a nation of consumers. And the Vance and what President Trump are talking about is that you can't consume your way to prosperity. You cannot consume your way to security, national security. You cannot consume your way to a growing middle class. And we had really, enacted a set of policies that was pushed by economists and rolled into policymakers, these free trade policies. They were using a broken economic model, a model that had zero predictive accuracy. And we kept enacting more and more free trade policies, and we kept consuming more and more, but we were losing our middle class and losing our wealth. And so, when you understand that, the importance of manufacturing, that's where we get that prosperity. That's where we get that national security. And so that's kind of where they're coming from. That's where they're starting from. They understand the vital role that manufacturing plays in the U.S. economy and national security, and that it supports high quality jobs that create economic stability for people of all classes, not just the elites, but people across the Rust Belt, across America. And so I think, you mentioned some of the tariffs, and earlier in your segment, you talked about regulation issues. I think regulation is important, getting rid of some of the unnecessary red tape. But I think to really get back to pro-growth, pro-worker, pro-America policies, we've got to do more with tariffs and do more with quotas. And the reason is that other nations, they've enacted a lot of predatory policies, policies that take advantage of us as the consumer of last resort. They overproduce and underconsume at home. China, for example, they don't consume enough of what they produce. And in reality, what the tariffs can do for America is allow us to consume more of what we produce. We want to sell to ourselves first. We want to shelter companies and industries and let them grow to scale, selling to America. And then we can unleash them on the world. They can export. But the reality is the American market is the biggest marketplace in the world. And it will be like that for a long time. The other part of tariffs are quotas. And I think, we can talk a little bit more about that. And below that, it becomes industrial policy, right? We saw that like with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Okay, so let me ask a question here on tariffs specifically. There are some arguments out there, of course, that if you increase tariffs, that's going to increase prices on consumers. Do you see that happening?
It simply isn't true. That's the dog that doesn't bark. What we see with tariffs, for example, the solar industry, right? There's a lot of tariffs that have been put in place by both the Trump and Biden administration on solar. And what we saw was billions of dollars of investment from both American companies as well as foreign companies in America. There were also incentives put in industrial policy through the Inflation Reduction Act, incentives to build solar here. We saw the price continue to drop despite the implementation of tariffs. So prices did not go up despite what everybody said. And we saw thousands of jobs created in America and billions of dollars of investment. So that's just one example, but industry after industry, steel, aluminum. My company is a manufacturer and we use a lot of steel and aluminum. And we saw, a temporary increase. There was some noise in the marketplace, but that's worked itself out. Largely, the inflation was driven by printing money and by shortages, right? That's what drives those prices up. So if we create more sources of supply, domestic sources of supply, we will get the good jobs and we will drive the price down because we have increased supply to meet the demand.
Okay, let's take China for example here. Specifically, labor costs. Is it not true that it is more expensive to make a product in the U.S. because of labor costs and other costs?
Absolutely. But, again, I'm a manufacturer and we can compete with any nation. There are ways, through productivity, through automation, there are ways to compete with the low labor costs. That is really not the only thing. The other angle, what's really the big elephant in the room is the currency, right? China, a great example, manipulates their currencies. So do a lot of our trading partners, both friendly and adversarial. They do it to gain a competitive advantage. And right now, the United States, the dollar keeps reaching new, greater highs on a daily basis because there's inflows of foreign capital coming into the United States. So other countries are smart to work to get a competitive balance on their currency level. I think the United States needs to focus on that, and that can help us offset any labor cost differential that we have. With a competitive currency and a protective marketplace, we'll be able to automate, to increase capacity, and to be competitive on labor.
All right, Zach, very great points here. Glad we got your comments here. Thank you very much.
Well, wonderful to be with you, Don. Keep up the great work.
All right, moving on. Ford is backing out of its EV plans. A plant that was supposed to become an EV hub will now produce gas-powered pickup trucks. The plant in Ontario, Canada will get $2.3 billion to produce Ford's Super Duty truck. So Ford says that the Canadian plant will begin operations in 2026 and churn out 100,000 trucks a year. And Ford's CEO says the Super Duty truck is so popular, Ford just can't make enough of them. And Ford was planning to use the plant to produce electric vehicles. The company's goal in 2021 was for EVs to make up half of their global sales by 2030. But last year, its Model E EV lost $4.7 billion, while the gas-guzzling Super Duty trucks earned $7.2 billion. And from first to second and now third, Bud Light was once the top-selling beer in the US, but its sales have slipped after a boycott over a sponsored post with a transgender influencer. Michelob Ultra has surpassed Bud Light to become the second best-selling beer at grocery stores and convenience stores. This is according to data during the sales period from Memorial Day to July 4th. Both Bud Light and Michelob Ultra are brewed by Anheuser-Busch. The company has been putting more marketing money into Michelob Ultra, and it seems to be paying off. But Modelo Especial is still holding on to the top title. It's made by rival Constellation brands. And backlash over diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives isn't just limited to the beer industry. One of the latest major U.S. companies making adjustments here is John Deere. The farm equipment maker announced that it will no longer sponsor social and cultural awareness events. On X, it added, quote, diversity quotas and pronoun identification have never been and are not company policy. One of its competitors, Tractor Supply Company, was also hit with backlash. So it ended both its corporate diversity and climate efforts. Tractor Supply pledged to eliminate all its DEI rules and retire current DEI goals. Now, 28 months in prison, that's the sentence handed down to a former Goldman Sachs and Blackstone analyst for insider trading. Anthony Vigiano called his own conduct, quote, catastrophically stupid. The 27-year-old was accused of sharing tips about several planned corporate mergers and partnerships with two friends. This included American International Group selling part of its business to Blackstone and Goldman client Advent International buying satellite operator Maxar Technologies. Prosecutors saying that the friends made more than $400,000 in illegal profits, and one of them gave Vigiano $35,000. All three pleaded guilty. As well, President Joe Biden today announcing yet another $1.2 billion in student loan debt relief. And this time it's for public service workers. We talked with a former senior Obama administration official for his take.
President Biden is forgiving an additional $1.2 billion in student loans, this time for public service workers, like teachers, nurses, police officers, and the military.
I'm delighted, and I hope he continues to cancel more. Public service doesn't pay very well, and most people go into it understanding that, but oftentimes these young people go in with a crushing student loan debt. And we need talented people.
Benjamin Webb is a former official in the Obama administration and served in the Army for 24 years. He hopes this incentivizes others to get into public service.
My own son, who's a major in the National Guard, as well as works in government, in the intelligence community, he had a significant student loan debt forgiven last year. And he was able to buy a house.
Webb says college costs have gotten out of control, in some cases tripling over the past 20 years. He says only the wealthy will be able to go to college if nothing is done. But not everyone supports this policy.
Think about the college students that did pay off their loans in time and they paid it out. Do they get anything? Of course not. And what about the millions of Americans who chose not to go to college and decided instead to opt into a career or a job training program or an apprenticeship?
Economist Thomas Savage says the policy punishes these Americans who don't qualify for forgiveness. He says that to fix higher education, the federal government should stop giving schools hundreds of billions of dollars. As facilities and programs expand, tuition surges, often without producing results.
We're seeing degrees, but we're not seeing the actual educational value increase of those degrees. 31% of students are walking away from college with a loss, a net loss. So they're not getting a return on investment, they're getting a loss on investment.
Department of Education says its goal is to foster educational excellence and ensure equal access.
All right, let's take a break now. Coming up, Beijing announcing a range of new economic policy goals, but gave no details on how it plans to get there. And Amazon reports its biggest Prime Day ever, but didn't give any specific number. We'll have that and more coming up after the break. We have breaking news for you. Just now, conservative talk show host Lou Dobbs has died at the age of 78. Former President Trump announced the news on Truth Social. Trump called him a friend and, quote, truly incredible journalist, reporter, and talent. Dobbs joined CNN in 1980 and became the host of Moneyline. Later, the show was rebranded to Lou Dobbs Tonight. He left CNN in 2009, then joined Fox Business Network, continuing to host Lou Dobbs Tonight until 2021. Trump did not say how Dobbs died. Meanwhile, newly announced economic policy goals in China appear to be the same promises made before, years before, in fact. State-controlled news agency Xinhua published a report on the meeting of the Communist Party Central Committee. The report listed a vast swath of goals, but gave no details on how Beijing plans to get there. So we're seeing similar promises that have been made in other official documents over the past decade. Currently, import barriers from the US and Europe and low domestic consumer sentiment is forcing businesses into price wars. Low wage growth and job market uncertainty, as well as the crisis-hit property sector, are also contributing to a poor outlook. Leaders said that they want to modernize industries, expand domestic demand, and curb debt and property sector risks. A document on the details of the goals is expected to be coming in the coming days. And Yemen's Houthi attacking cargo ships in the Red Sea are starting to sink profits for the Suez Canal. Its revenue fell to $7 billion in this fiscal year, compared that to $9 billion for the year before. Commercial vessels in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean have been under attack since November. The Iran-backed Houthis say this is to show support for the Palestinian Hamas terrorist group in its fight against Israel. Some shippers have switched to alternative routes to avoid the area, and as a result, the number of ships passing through has dropped by nearly 6,000 this year. And that's according to the head of the Egyptian Canals Authority. The Suez Canal is a key source of foreign currency for Egypt. Now, with Prime Day orders out for delivery, the e-commerce giant is sharing that it just had its biggest Prime Day event ever. Amazon didn't say how much it earned, though, but reported record sales and noted that millions joined Prime to take advantage of the deals. Third-party data indicates that shoppers spent 11% more this year during the 2 days of the sales. Adobe Analytics reports some $14 billion worth of purchases on Tuesday and Wednesday on Amazon.com. This was driven by shoppers searching for example, back-to-school supplies, electronics, and home appliances. While online shoppers are grabbing deals on Amazon Prime Day, the company's warehouse workers are more likely to get injured. That's according to findings of a U.S. Senate investigation. So the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions found that Amazon's warehouses are especially dangerous during Prime Day and the holiday season. The report found that those times have a high volume of work-intense pressure to work long hours and ignore safety guidelines. In a statement, an Amazon spokesperson says the safety and health of its employees is a top priority. And since 2019, reportable injuries are down 28%. And in that same year, 1 out of 10 workers had injuries severe enough to report to OSHA, more than double the average in the U.S. warehouse and storage industry. All right, and that is all the stories we have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you have any feedback or anything you'd like to tell me, please let me know. You can email us at business@ntd.com or leave a comment online. I do read them for every episode. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.